I'm 61 years old. My name is Marlene. I've spent most of my life believing in order, in tradition, in following the rules. I married young, raised 2 children, and kept our home in line like it was my own quiet kingdom. I wasn't someone drawn to risks or overwhelming emotions. Love to me was consistency, not fire, not secrecy. But last summer, when my son returned from college, something shifted. I never imagined anything like this would happen to me. Please don't repeat the mistake I made. It was early afternoon when Aaron came back. Always on time, that boy. Clean, polite, smart, just like his father. The driveway was still damp from a recent rainstorm when I saw his old Toyota pull in, the tires softly pressing against the pavement. I stood at the kitchen window, drying my hands with a dish towel, watching him with a tightness in my chest. I had missed him more than I admitted. The house had felt colder since he left, not just empty, but still in a way I couldn't describe. His laughter used to bounce off the walls. Even the creaks in the floorboards seemed quieter without him walking across them. He walked inside with a duffel slung over his shoulder and that same lopsided grin he'd had since he was little. "Hey, Mom," he said, dropping the bag by the door and wrapping his arms around me. He smelled like wet leaves and fabric softener, and when I hugged him back, I realized just how much wider his shoulders had become. We chatted over dinner. He picked at his plate more than usual, and I noticed he avoided my eyes when I asked how school was going. I chalked it up to pressure, exams, maybe a breakup. College can be tangled. But over the next few days, something deeper became apparent. Not bad, just hidden. One evening I found him out on the back porch. The sky was the color of pewter, that thick gray before a summer downpour, and he was gazing at it like he expected something to drop from the clouds. I brought him a cup of chamomile tea, something we used to do when he had bad dreams as a child, and I sat beside him. "Something bothering you?" he asked. He hesitated. His jaw clenched, the way it did when he was about to cry but didn't want to. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said softly, not meeting my gaze. "But I'm not sure how." I didn't push. I just sipped my tea and waited. "Do you remember when I was 12 and I said I didn't want to go back to camp?" He nodded. "You said the other boys made you feel different." He glanced at me then, eyes flickering with something like recognition. "That wasn't the whole reason," he said. "I didn't know how to say it then, but I knew something about myself. And I was scared to tell you." The air between us thickened, like even the trees had gone quiet. I reached for his hand. "Aaron, whatever it is, you can tell me." He looked at me, really looked, and said, "Mom, I'm gay." Strange what runs through your head when someone tells you something like that. The thoughts aren't always the right ones. Sometimes they're just echoes. Echoes of an old world that told you what to expect and what to fear. I didn't respond right away. I didn't cry or shout or hug him. I just sat there, stunned, ashamed I hadn't realized sooner. He looked away, and in his profile, I saw something in him break. A kind of resignation, like he'd braced himself for disappointment. I cupped his cheek and turned his face back to me. "You're still my son," I whispered. "That doesn't change." His eyes closed, and a tear rolled down his cheek. "I thought maybe you'd be disappointed," he said. That word cut deep. Disappointed. Like a crack in fine china. How many times had I told him to be proud of who he was? How many times had I sworn I'd love him no matter what? And here he was, afraid to be honest with me. After he went to bed that night, I stayed on the porch for hours. The rain came, light at first, then steady. I let it soak through my sweater, through my skin, like it might rinse away every bit of doubt or delay I'd ever carried. And then something else happened. It wasn't just Aaron who'd been holding back a truth. Had one too. One I hadn't dared to face until his courage made something shift in me. The next morning I moved through the house like always. The coffee brewed, the sunlight crept through the curtains, but everything inside me felt different. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him scroll on his phone, curled up in that same worn sweatshirt from high school. He looked peaceful, brighter, and I was proud, but also rattled, not by who he was, but by how small I had made my own world. That evening, as we prepped dinner together, chopping peppers and onions side by side like we'd done 100 times, I asked a question I hadn't meant to ask. Is there someone? His knife stopped mid-slice. He gave a shy smile. Actually, yeah. And just like that, a new part of our relationship began. Not just mother and son, but two people getting to know each other all over again, honestly this time. He told me about Jordan, a fellow architecture student, a bit older, kind, thoughtful, apparently obsessed with terrariums. Aaron's eyes lit up when he spoke of him, in a way I hadn't seen in years. I wanted to bring him home this summer, Aaron said, voice cautious. But I didn't know if I could. I paused with my hands in the sink, turned to him slowly. You still can, I said. If you want to. He gave the smallest nod, but it meant everything. 3 days later I met Jordan. He was taller than I imagined, with gentle brown eyes and a soft demeanor. He brought a pie from a nearby bakery, peach my favorite, and wore a button-up he kept adjusting nervously. Mrs. Keller, it's so nice to meet you, he said. Marlene, I corrected with a smile. Please. We sat in the garden for hours that day. I asked about his family, his studies, and those beloved terrariums. He was sweet, a little shy, and kept glancing at Aaron with unmistakable tenderness. I'll admit, something tugged in me at first. Not jealousy, not really. Just a quiet ache. The realization that my son's heart belonged to someone else now. Not replacing me, just expanding. Later I stood at the sink again, washing plates, listening to their laughter from the next room. I looked through the doorway, Aaron leaning in close to show Jordan a photo album, his hand resting gently on his knee, and I thought, this is love. Not tidy, not always expected, but true. As I dried my hands, I caught my reflection in the window. For the first time in a long while, I didn't see someone stuck in yesterday. I saw someone awake. That night, once they'd gone upstairs, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the porch again. That's when it happened. A name floated into my mind, one I hadn't said in decades. Blair. And with it came a memory. A summer afternoon when we were both 16, lying on a blanket by the lake, her hand brushing mine, our laughter mixing with the sounds of water. We never spoke of it again, not after the way my mother looked at us when she found us too close on the back porch. Not after Claire moved away. I had buried that memory deep, convinced myself it was just a phase, fleeting moment, nothing real. But that night I let it surface. And I didn't push it away this time. Maybe Aaron wasn't the only one who had lived with a truth tucked away. Maybe life was offering me a second chance, not just to understand him, but to remember something I'd forgotten in myself. I didn't know what I'd do with that memory. Not yet. But for the first time in years I was open to finding out. The next morning I woke early. The house was still except for the ticking clock and birdsong outside the window. I stood at the sink, coffee mug in hand, feeling a strange flutter in my chest. Something inside me had stirred. Later, after Aaron and Jordan went to the farmer's market, I climbed up to the attic. I hadn't been up there since my husband Richard passed away. Dust sparkled in the sunlight slanting through the small window, and I felt drawn to an old cedar chest tucked behind some holiday boxes. Inside were scraps of my younger self. Journals, letters, photographs curling at the edges. One was tucked inside a poetry book, a snapshot of Claire and me, both in cut-off shorts, grinning under the sun. Her arm draped around my shoulder. I remembered how safe I felt then. Back then I didn't have the words. I just knew that when she looked at me I felt known. But the world we lived in didn't allow room for that kind of love. Not for girls like us. It told us to hide those feelings. To marry well, raise children, not question the ache that never went away. I sat on the attic floor for a long time, turning that photo over, crying. Not from regret exactly, but for all the versions of me that never got to live. When the boys came home, Aaron sensed something was off. "You okay, Mom?" he asked, laying a small bouquet of sunflowers on the counter. "My favorite." I smiled, swallowing the lump in my throat. Just thinking about how fast it all goes. That night, after Jordan left and Aaron went upstairs, I poured another glass of wine and sat by the fire. This time I didn't push the memories aside. I let them breathe. I remembered Claire singing along to Fleetwood Mac, showing me how to braid hair, the way we clung to each other in the dark, afraid and fearless at once. That wasn't a phase. That was real. And I had spent a lifetime pretending it wasn't. I pulled out a notepad from the drawer, hands slightly trembling, and wrote 3 simple words. Look her up. I didn't know what I'd find. Maybe she had a family. Maybe she'd forgotten me. But I had to try. Not to rekindle anything, just to honor that forgotten part of me. The next morning I opened my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, heart hammering. Typed her name. Claire Holstead. And there she was. Gray hair, neat and lovely. A gentle smile. An article from a local paper. Recently retired, former English teacher, living just 2 towns away. My breath caught. Aaron walked into the room. "Who's that?" I hesitated. Then said, "Someone who used to mean a lot to me." He looked at the photo, then back at me, warm and steady. Maybe it's time to reach out. It felt like the roles had reversed. My son giving me permission to live fully. Maybe we were both just figuring it out. That night I wrote and rewrote an email. What do you even say to someone you haven't seen in 44 years? Eventually I sent, "Hi Claire. I'm not sure if you remember me, but this is Marlene Keller. We were friends back in the summers at Pine Lake. I came across your name in a local article and felt compelled to reach out. If you're open to it, I'd love to reconnect." I stared at the send button. Then click. The rest of the day I kept myself busy. Organizing, tidying, anything to keep from refreshing my inbox. Around 7 p.m. the notification pinged. Claire had replied. "Marlene, of course I remember you. I've thought of you more times than I can count. I'd love to see you again. There's so much I've always wanted to say. Please let's meet." My hands shook as I read her message. We agreed to meet at a lakeside cafe that weekend. The same lake we used to dream beside. When I arrived, she was already there. 2 cups of coffee. That same soft smile. "Marlene," she said, standing to hug me. "You haven't changed a bit." I laughed, suddenly shy. I think my niece would disagree. We talked for hours. About everything. She never married. "I tried," she said. "But no one made me feel the way you did. Even then." I looked out to the lake. I always wondered if I made it up. That maybe it was just in my head. She reached across the table and held my hand. "You didn't." Later we walked the path by the water, the scent of lilacs drifting. "I never told anyone about you," I said. "Not even Richard." "I understand," she said. "We weren't allowed to be ourselves back then. But maybe now we are." She smiled, eyes glistening. "It's never too late, Marvy." When I got home, Aaron and Jordan were at the table, laughing, playing cards. The house felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. "How was it?" Aaron asked. I stood in the doorway, full. It felt like finding a piece of myself I didn't know I'd lost. He nodded, like he understood without needing to say anything else. That summer changed everything. Not because I fell in love again, but because I finally remembered what love actually is. Not just duty. Not just history. But truth. Intimacy. Connection.